We're going to explore the three-point lighting setup inside of Lightwave. This is a lighting setup that has been used by photography teachers to teach new students about lighting principles, and I think it's a great place to start in Lightwave as well. As you already know at this point, if you've watched the previous tutorial on lighting, you know that Lightwave comes by default with one distant light. We can have as many lights as we want in the scene, but it comes by default with one distant light. So I'm going to go ahead and implement this distant light in the three-point lighting setup, but I'm going to add two more lights to the process as well. Let's start with the distant light position. As I mentioned in the other lesson, the position of the light, of a distant light, is really irrelevant. So I'm just getting this one out of the way so it doesn't really distract us as we go about editing our scene. So the goal with this particular light is going to be to create an edge to our subject. In this case, our subject is called Stu. He is our model here for us, and this could be any object if you're following along with some other character or other object. It really doesn't matter. The goal with this light is to create a rim of light around the back of Stu's body. So how do we achieve that? First of all, we need to increase the intensity of the light itself, because the light needs to be very, very bright in order for this to have any impact. So I'm going to start with a number of 600 for the light intensity. Now, as you can see, that washes out the whole scene. So it doesn't really seem like a practical number, but we're not done. So the goal is to create a halo of light, as I mentioned, around Stu's body, not to light the room. So if you remember from the previous lesson, we can turn off the effect of the light on the room by going to Objects, disabling it, and that will enable us to light only Stu with this light. So when I click on Exclude, I'm excluding the layer 2, which is my room. Alright, so now let's get back to basics. We'll go to the Basic tab, and we're going to rotate this distant light so that it only creates an edge around Stu's body. And there you have it. You see that edge? This is what I'm talking about. Now we can change the pitch to, kind of make it angled more from the top, but it's mostly through the heading, and we're creating this silhouette almost effect with this edge around Stu's body. And just go ahead and pivot these until you get exactly what I'm looking at here, which is just this kind of distant edge lighting. It's strong, it's harsh, but because this light is not lighting the floor, we don't have to worry about the shadows that a harsh light like this creates. If you did want to use this light for shadows, then we could use something like a dome light. But in this case, it's not going to matter because it's not going to create any shadows. This is what we would call our backlight. So how do you rename a light? Well, let's go to our scene editor. I'm going to go to the dope sheet. There's my light. Let's give it a name. I'm going to right click on it, and let's give it a new name by going to Manipulate, Rename. I'm going to call this Backlight. There's a lot of terms for the backlight in real-world photography. Sometimes it's referred to as a hair light, because often this will create a halo effect around people's hair. Sometimes it's referred to as a kicker, but backlight will give us a nice broad term to implement with a variety of different types of models that we might use it for. Let's go on and make a new light now. So when I make a new light, I come to Items, the Items tab, and I click Add Light. And from this, I have a pop-up list of all the different light types that we discussed in the previous lesson. So let me go ahead and choose a good light for our primary light source. So this should be a light that has good quality shadows, that is controllable, and maybe can be adjusted in terms of the fall off. So area light would be a great choice for that. Other choices that you could possibly use would be a linear light or a point light, but again, they're not going to give you the same quality of shadows. So let's go ahead and just choose an area light. I'm going to call this my key light. Key light is the term that we use to describe the main light source in your scene. In other words, it's the light source, whatever that may be, or whatever the position may be, or whatever color, whatever shape. It's the light in the scene that defines the exposure, that basically draws the most attention in most cases. So here's my new light. It's now on the floor. I'm going to hit the T key to move it to get it into position. And what I'm going to do is just kind of move it off to this other side here to complement the edge light that we created. Now we want to have a contrast with lighting. We want to have some lights darker and some lights brighter. That's why we created a nice bright edge light there to create the rim, that backlight. So my backlight is the distant light, and I can flip back and forth between the key light and the backlight. This light, however, is going to create my shadows, so why don't I go ahead and size it up a bit. Let's go to modify size. As you know, we can scale an area light to change the type of shadow, and we can rotate it as well. So I'm going to hit Y for rotate, just spin it around a bit and create a different position so that I'm lighting Stu and creating a shadow that I find aesthetically pleasing. Now, I'm not really too concerned about what you find is best, as long as you're creating enough light that we can see Stu's body. And if we want, we can go a step further by implementing fall off, and that would require us to then expand the range until we get Stu's body in range. Now that will also allow us to darken the back if we want a little bit, the background. Now, once the range has been defined, we might increase the intensity. By default, new lights can receive an intensity of 50%. So we can increase the brightness of this and ramp it up quite a bit, and then, you know, just kind of create a balance between the fall off distance and the intensity of the light till we get something like this. So what does this do? Here we've got our key light and our distant light together, creating this illusion through the camera. So we have a nice bright edge, and we have a nice soft light creating a aesthetically pleasing shadow on the floor. So we have two intensities, obviously, but we only have one color. Maybe we should warm up the key light a bit. Let's give it a bit of a warm glow. A little orange. And that creates a nice pleasing effect. Maybe we should contrast that by going the opposite of the color wheel and going with a colder light on the distant light. So instead of white, I'm going to choose something colder like blue. Now we have a really interesting dramatic color contrast between the warm and the cold, as well as the intensity. So a key light, as I mentioned, defines the exposure for your primary subject, in this case Stu. In this case, we're also defining the shadows. But what if we want to fill in some of these shadows on Stu's body? That's where we implement what we call a fill light. Maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit closer with my camera so you can see this better. But you notice how Stu's body has got these strong shadows on this side. Sometimes that's interesting for visual effect, which is why I often tell people you really only need two lights for each subject, a key light and a backlight. We could stop right here, and for most projects, I'd be totally happy. And as long as you position them correctly and utilize them correctly, and as far as I'm concerned, that's all you need. But if you want to take it a step further and add a fill, you can. A fill light fills in shadows. That's why it's called a fill light. So let's create one. I'm going to go to the Items tab once again, and I'm going to choose Add Lights. This time I'm going to choose a different type of light. I could choose a point light. That would be good for a fill. A spherical light would also be a good choice if I wanted to keep the shadows. A linear light might also be a good choice. Let's go with spherical. Let's call it fill. And I'm going to take that spherical light and move it over here to this side because that's where the shadows are. Now remember, every light that comes in is set to 50%. So it's going to be a little darker than the others, and that's how a fill light should be. In fact, maybe even a little more dark. But You notice it's creating its own shadow on this side, and it's washing out my other shadows. So I probably would either want to do a couple things. One is I could turn off the shadows completely. I can go to off. Now that's also going to turn off the shadows it would create on Stu's body. So if I don't want that, I could then turn off the objects instead, and I can just prevent this from lighting the background and have it only light Stu. I think that would be my choice, but I still may want to turn off shadows, but I think I'll go ahead and leave them on. I think that they're aesthetically pleasing. They're spherical shadows, which are good quality. Let's make the light a little bigger, which will soften them even more. And the intensity, here you can see exactly, when I drop this down, that's without the light. Now I'm just filling in that shadow. You see how it fills in? Alright, so it's just a slight little filling in of those shadows. I can raise this up a bit. Sometimes it's hard to know exactly in perspective view where your light's sitting, but ultimately all that matters is what you see through the camera. So that's at 34%, that's at 0. So it just gives a little accent, a little fill to your subject, so it's not so shadowy. But again, this is totally optional. I don't think a fill is required on any level, but here it is. Those are your 3 basic lights. At this point, other lights might be used to light other characters, other objects, other props, background elements, or even the room. We don't even have a light to light the room. I could use the key light and brighten it up to light more of the room, or I could create accent lights that are just designed for the room. Maybe a practical light, such as a lamp, to create a more natural physical environment for an interior space. So wherever you take it from here, you have a lot of options. But the key is, for the 3-point lighting setup, this is the fundamental. I would like you to light every single character that you create in Lightwave according to this standard. At least 2 lights for every character. And it's real simple. It didn't take us long to do. It's a pretty easy setup. But I'll leave it at that. That is all there is to the 3-point lighting setup. The next time we look at lights, we'll take a look at some of the special effects elements you can create with lights, like flares and volumetrics.